All right, welcome everybody. We have some more folks joining us, but I'm going to get started with our intro and housekeeping. Welcome and thanks for joining us for Tipping Point. This is Connecticut's first affordable housing conference series. My name is Kylie Goslin. I'm the executive director of the Partnership for Strong Communities. And throughout the week, the partnership has been hosting about 30 sessions featuring local, state, and national experts leading conversations that explore challenges, share best practices, and coalesce us around critical next steps to address key affordable housing issues here in the state of Connecticut. You can join the conversation about Tipping Point on Twitter at hashtag TippingPoint2020, and you can follow us at PSC Housing if you aren't already. This session you're here to participate in today is about dealing with housing inequality at the local level. We have a great lineup of presenters for you today. Before we get to that, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping though. First, I'd like to thank our leading sponsors, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, as well as the Melville Charitable Trust. Their deep support has allowed this conference series to exist, and we thank them. Thanks also to our collaborating sponsor, the Connecticut Department of Housing, our supporting sponsor, Housing Enterprises, Inc. in Whittlesey. And finally, the sponsor for this session, our friends over at Shipman and Goodwin. Thank you so much for helping us keep this conference going. We so appreciate it. Some housekeeping items. This is a Zoom meeting. It's not a Zoom webinar. So that means that although you entered muted, you could unmute yourself. We're going to ask that you keep yourself muted throughout the session so that we can hear the presenters. So please don't come off mute unless one of the presenters asks you to do so. A second note that the session is being recorded. At the conclusion of the conference, and I think actually already some of the sessions are already posted on our website. We'll be posting all of these recordings on our website for you to view later or to share with others. That's pschousing.org. Finally, if you have a technology issue, we just ask that you use the chat icon to submit any tech issues, and we'll do our best to help you resolve those. And finally, for the Q&A, you can put your questions in the chat. And I think as we get to the conclusion of the presentation, our presenters will be able to view those, or I can help forward, or Kaylee with the partnership can help forward those questions to the presenters. So again, feel free to put resources, links, and questions in that chat window in addition to any tech issues you're having. And then if you've joined any of these sessions before, you'll know that a couple minutes before the end of the session, you're going to see a poll pop up asking you for feedback on this session. We ask you to take the 30 seconds if you would, and just give us your thoughts on how the session went. This will help us prepare great feedback or great webinars and conferences moving forward. So we really appreciate that. And then finally, you'll see in the chat window a link to a survey that we're doing as part of our Home Connecticut restructure. We're looking to create a bigger, better, more inclusive Home Connecticut moving forward. And we're really interested on your feedback in the direction of affordable housing advocacy in the state moving forward. So we just ask that you take the 5 minutes, and we have designed it to be a 5-minute survey, I promise, to do that survey and help our efforts moving forward. So with that, I am going to turn things over to our presenters. I'm not sure who to start off with, so I'll kick it over to John, David, Carr, and Hiram. Thank you.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm David Fink, and I know a lot of you, I hope. Anyway, it's good to see you all again. We have a great lineup today looking at how to deal with housing inequality at the local level. John Gostkowski is a very experienced planning consultant. He's worked in a lot of towns around the state. John is also very active with Connecticut APA and is their legislative director. So he understands the issues that towns face. Hiram Peck has been the planner in a number of towns. He's now the planner in Avon, Connecticut, and with lots of experience. And finally, Kara Dodds, who's also terrific, and she's in the town of Glastonbury. So they bring a lot to the table, and we hope to cover a lot in this period. I'm just going to quickly run through a few slides that get at the housing situation in the state and some of the issues that are dealt with on the local level. So John, I think, is going to run through them for us, and I'll just quickly put them out there. They will be obviously available to you going forward on the partnership's website, I'm certain, and in this recorded session. So again, housing in Connecticut, about 2/3 of the people in the state own their homes, another third rent. It is slightly lower ownership percentage, about 66% in the state, than it was. It was up closer to 70, but the demand over the last decade for multifamily housing has moved that slightly to more people renting. John, we can do the next slide. The cost burdens are high, and we know that. 49% of the renters in the state are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. That's terrible. That is a matter of supply and a few other factors in the state, but homeowners are also burdened by their housing costs. Again, these numbers will be available to you when you look more closely. John, the next one, please. What John and Kara and Hiram will talk a lot about today are some of the myths that get in the way of housing creation in their towns. There is very good research and much anecdotal evidence over the years that multifamily housing does not bring a huge number of school children as it gets raised at virtually every public hearing about a multifamily development. The Rutgers study back in the mid-2000s showed that very, very few school-age children in 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units. A more recent study in New Jersey, done for New Jersey TOD, bore that out. The results are consistent. And the town of Fairfield did a study in 2019 that, again, showed that same consistency. You just don't get a lot of school children. So that's a myth, a misconception. John, the next one. Again, there have been studies done here and elsewhere about the impact on property values. Again, people will come to public hearings and say that my property values will go down if this development goes up. And the truth is that that's just not true. We saw one study in the mid-2000s that was done by MIT on 8 developments along 495 in Massachusetts that showed, in fact, that in a few cases, neighboring property values actually went up when multifamily developments, affordable and mixed income, were built. And these new studies continue to show that. And again, they will be available to you if you look at the recording here in the partnership's website. Next one, John. Again, same thing. This was a British Columbia study done earlier this year that shows that. And then we'll continue on. I mean, the reason for housing being expensive in this state is pretty clear. We don't have enough of it, so it's a supply and demand issue. It's the fifth most expensive state with median monthly housing costs. And again, like anything else, the cost of goods and services is driven up anywhere by the people who can afford to pay them. And with Connecticut having the second highest wealth disparity in the nation after New York, wealthy people in the state are able to pay more for housing along with everything else. And so they have driven up the cost of that housing. Connecticut's housing wage, which recently came out, is 9th highest in the nation, about $26 an hour, or that translates to about $52,000 a year to afford a typical 2-bedroom apartment in the state. John? And last, I wanted to point out a number of you have become familiar with the United Way of Connecticut's ALICE study. A new version came out recently. ALICE is Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. These people are working individuals and families, and they make what used to be thought to be levels of income termed by the study as a survival budget that used to be thought of as pretty high: $29,000 for an individual, $32,000 for a senior, and $90,000 for a household of 4 in the state. Yet those people, if they have an unexplained expense or one of the people in the family has his or her hours reduced, suddenly can't pay for the necessities in town. The thing to understand is that 149 of the 169 towns in the state have at least 20% of their households as ALICE households. So these people are really very close to becoming homeless or having to really stretch in order to afford their housing costs. And statewide, 38% of the households in Connecticut are ALICE households. So that's the situation that John, Hiram, Kara, and a lot of planners are dealing with when issues come up about proposed developments in their towns and the response by the residents. So with that, I'd like to kick this off by, I guess, maybe we'll go in alphabetical order. We'll go with Kara and then John and Hiram, and just kind of ask you a pretty open-ended question about what are the most common issues that you guys encounter when you confront proposals for local housing developments? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you having to deal with? Kara?
Yes, so with housing developments, there are some issues that we do encounter when we get proposals before us. I think one is that people have a concern about density, and there's a notion of making sure that the housing isn't crammed in there, or to make sure that housing is that people have enough space and is spread out. And, there is a way to design projects. So I think that's one way in which, we can bridge an understanding with how to design it. So, people don't get this myth about density looking one particular way. Another issue that we encounter are sometimes we have a lot of farmland that turns over into housing development, and sometimes those applications may be right up against another existing neighborhood. So there is a concern when projects come before us that residents in abutting neighborhoods feel like they're going to lose the scenic vistas, or they like the farmland that's next to them. These are the issues that they talk about. So that's just giving you a general sense of what some of the issues that we encounter. Also, I think on the regulatory side, we do have some of our projects may be planned area development projects or adaptive redevelopment zone projects. And with those type of projects, it has to go through a two-step process with the Town Planning and Zoning Commission, and also with the Town Council, because the Town Council in Glastonbury is the final zoning authority. So sometimes that can end up being a cumbersome process, a lengthy process. And there are public hearings towards the end of that process that may, there may be residents that come out to speak against the project for a variety of reasons. So those are some of the things that we hear from the residents, but also some of the things that developers experience also.
John, are you seeing the similar issues here? And on these issues like density and is it really density that they're concerned about? Or are they concerned about how it's going to look? Or are they concerned that there's just going to be too many people around? What are you hearing?
It's sort of all of the above, but when you, I think it sort of boils down to how in your face, how in the face of the members of the public is this development going to be? How much are they actually going to have to see or be impacted by the development? And it's not really a density thing. I think it's sort of a visibility thing. Because there was an interesting sort of natural test case in one of the towns I work for, which I'll leave anonymous for right now, where we had the first two 830G applications in decades, both happened within the course of a single year in this one town. And those two applications happened to be less than a quarter mile away from each other. One of them was set back behind some existing buildings, about 20 units, both these are both apartments, 20 units on about an acre, that was senior housing. The other was about 50 units on 3 acres. So actually a slightly less dense when you run the numbers. But it was going to be on a major road and more visible. And it was also mixed age, not age restricted. It was market, but also an 830G. There were literally no public comments, no public outrage, no real attention paid to the senior housing that was set back a little bit off the road. But the town lost its damn mind over the 50-unit multifamily affordable housing that was more visible. And raised all of the concerns about claiming questions about traffic and density and things like that were not brought up at all for the other similarly dense project. So I think it was more a matter of perception and fear, sort of unfounded myths about affordable housing. But as much as that, this one is going to be in our face. We are going to see this every day. And we feel like it might change the town in some, hard to put a finger on sort of way. And I think it's just change is hard, and people can hide behind whatever, justifications they want, density, traffic, school systems, whatever those common, reasons are, those go-to reasons or myths. But it's really, I think, just change is hard for people.
Yeah, I think my old behavioral psych teacher used to talk about change as loss, and that's what people just are afraid to lose the town or the neighborhood or what they think they have. But what are you saying, Hiram? The same sort of thing, and you were in Simsbury before that, and you were been in a number of towns in Greenwich. What are you saying?
Yeah, I've been probably run out of many towns. I think that many of the problems that we have are very similar. I think that typically what happens is just to sort of add to the list of things that have been mentioned so far are the perceived costs to these developments. That's really sort of an interesting thing. Typically, that's not accompanied by a lot of facts from people that oppose those developments, but I think that's typically what happens is that people talk about the costs of the developments. A couple of specific things are school children, and I thought that the slide that you had on school children was very helpful and very accurate, and I think that a lot of people should take note of that. Along with that, and the school children issue was recently a very important component of one application that we had here. Did not turn out to be an 8-30G application, but we did manage to approve an incentive housing zone, affordable overlay zone. Actually, we call it an attainable housing overlay zone here in Avon recently, and that was sort of provided a compromise and didn't get to an 8-30G application, but it did allow a mechanism for allowing in the approval of a significant development with regard to those things. But the costs and the school children was a significant issue during those hearings. The other one is traffic, and we always hear about traffic, and we hear about traffic as being very difficult for keeping people from getting to work on time. And to me, there are many different ways to address that, but those are the typical things that we hear. Perceived issues, I would agree with John, certainly that people can see it. It's very, very important, obviously, to have a good design if they can see it, but a lot of people don't want to have it in their face all the time. So those are two additional issues that we see all the time, David.
Okay, so a range of issues. Some are, as Kara said, maybe a little more bureaucratic because it's the public hearings and the number of boards and commissions that have to deal with these. And some are issues, like John said, that may mask concerns that are greater or deeper than what people are actually stating. So what concerns you about what you hear in response to these developments? What do you think you're really dealing with? What's the town really dealing with? The residents and the developer as well. What's really underneath all this that we have to get at here and solve? And we can start again with Kara if you want, or if one of you, John or Hiram, wants to start, that's okay too.
Okay, so since I've been here in Glastonbury, we have not had an affordable housing project or an 8-30G project. We've had one that was an existing one with the housing authority that was expanded, but and more units were added, but it was, you know, the same project and the same location. But I will say, you know, in general, I think when it comes to affordable housing, it would be, people need to understand what affordable housing is and why it is important, I think. There are a lot of, you know, quality of life benefits for the whole community. So, you know, I think there's a myth about affordable housing that's out there that's probably underlying all of this. But, you know, to dispel the myth, I think there needs to be a greater understanding of all of the quality of life benefits that can come to a community, what it can do for the residents, the children, the seniors, the workers in the community. So, you know, I don't know if that particularly answers the question, but, you know, I think that could help to counter some of the myths that we hear.
So general communication. John, is it what bothers you about this? What do you think we really need to get at?
Yeah, I mean, Kara's absolutely right that public perception and public education is absolutely critical. It's also exhausting. Just you know, fighting that fight against people who aren't interested in the facts is a challenge. The thing that frustrates me is the process, and frankly, I mean the special permit or special exception process. Every town I've worked in and for, unfortunately, basically any multifamily development, unless it's 830G, is a special permit or special exception process, which means a public hearing, which means a lot of public engagement and process. And the answer isn't yes or no. You know, it's something that's zoning permit as of right or site plan is a yes, you know, assuming you check all your boxes. And, you know, if it's not allowed in the zone, then it's a no. But the problem with special permits and special exception is the answer is a maybe. And that maybe is far, far too influenced by the public participation who feels like they get a vote. And I think, and unfortunately, the commissioners who, you know, sit on these boards too often grant that vote, you know, to the public, you know, not explicitly. It's not it's not necessarily a referendum or a popular vote, but are far too willing to let their vote be influenced by the level of, you know, informed or ill-informed public involvement on it, which leaves these things in the balance. And you know, it scares away developers from even trying in many towns. And so if the answer is a maybe, that the public can have an outsized influence, and I have a growing problem with that. And it may be anti-democratic, but this is not necessarily the right process to be a democratic process. You know, towns and commissioners need to show genuine leadership on it.
So Hiram, what about that? I mean, the residents come and it's their town, and it's maybe they don't know as much as we might like them to know about the town housing market or the town housing needs. But you're finding that commissioners are too sensitive to the people who show up, and can you change the minds of the people who show up, or do you have to have other people who do understand the town's housing situation also come to the meeting?
I think those are really good points. I think that we've all been involved in a number of hearings throughout our careers, and we go through this process frequently, perhaps monthly in some cases. And I think one of the things that's most concerning or frustrating perhaps to all of us is that there seems to be a general lack of understanding of what the process is. Each town, and I know there's probably not 169 different processes. Some people may feel that there are more, but there are probably, you know, special permit processes and site plan processes that the general public typically doesn't understand. They understand that if there's a public hearing, they can stand up and voice their concerns. The problem, I think, is that many of the concerns that are voiced either have nothing to do with the application, or there's some preconceived notion about either the particular application or the process that gets the commissioners confused. And so one of the things that I've been very sort of vocal about in the last few years is trying to get as much education for commissioners as possible about what the actual facts are and what they should be paying attention to as these applications come forward. I think one of the other things that really concerns me is that what the commission should do in many cases is take a look at the value of the application to the community. I think in some cases, typically what happens is commissioners or even the public takes a look at what all the negatives are, and you hear a lot of the negatives during the public hearing, but we very rarely hear a good cross-referenced representation of what the values are to the community, whether it's a place for people that are not high income earners in the community, regular blue collar workers, school teachers, firefighters, and so on. But there are a lot of preconceived notions out there, and those things concern me, and especially after you've heard it, time after time after time. I have a sort of a standing joke with some of the members of my family, and I say, well, I either play, tape number 32 tonight over and over again, and that's the one you hear at many meetings. So I think trying to restore the process and get facts on the table and have a good, solid decision made when an application comes in, I think is very helpful. Those are the kinds of things that concern me typically.
Well, there has been, in the last couple of years, legislation proposed that would increase the amount of training that zoning commissioners receive. If you guys had to write the syllabus for that training, what would you include? And would it just be specific land use issues? Would it be understanding the town's housing market? Would it be understanding how to meet those needs, what other towns do? And finally, I think to get to Hiram's point, what do you think about the idea of zoning commissions, which have, I think by design, been created over the years to be independent of the town's finances and policy decisions, getting more training and understanding that increasing the grand list by giving the market what the market wants in the way of housing might also help the town's revenue structure and their ability to provide services. What would you guys put in the syllabus? Carrie, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I would put in certainly housing, affordable housing, also the importance of planning. We now have a requirement for affordable housing plans, to get them, because sometimes our commissions, they get wrapped up in the normal development applications and approvals, but there's also a planning function that helps us to take a step back and see the context, the full context of what that planning and zoning commission is charged with doing. And also the duty that they hold to the community where planning is concerned. I think that equity is also an important issue. I would certainly include that for, planning staff as well as commissioners. Equity cuts across a lot of the issues that we have in planning. And I think, that's another issue that can be brought to the forefront.
Mm-hmm. John, and then Hiram, why don't you guys add to the syllabus here? Because that's a really good start.
Yeah, I think I mean, maybe this is a little bit too academic, but I feel like it is important that commissioners need to have a real understanding of why zoning is a thing, and what fundamentally it was created for, what its impact has been over the last 100 years of zoning, for better or for worse, and many times for worse. How it's been used as a tool to promote segregation and inequality, and then how the town's master plan, the POCD, really needs to flow and be reflected in zoning regulations, because I think there is a huge disconnect that we set all these lofty, wonderful goals, equity and inclusion and mixed income, mixed densities and things like that, and then it doesn't get reflected in the zoning regulations. So understanding that. And then also understanding the market, housing market. And I think when Hiram referred to the value of development, I don't necessarily think he was referring to economic value, although that's a component of it. I think, the non-market community value of it. That's important, but also understanding, how supply and demand works and how their little town fits into a state or a regional or a global economy. And that's something that I think actually the state should be doing a better job of in this time where all towns are now required to do an affordable housing plan. We still don't really have a sense on a statewide level of what the state needs. What is our current housing gap? What is it going to be over the next 5 years? We literally have no idea. And that's something that local commissioners should know and should understand. But that's, there's a reason they don't understand it, is because we don't have that information right now.
Hiram, go ahead.
Yeah, Dave, I would say a couple things. I think that as far as a course is concerned, right now, many of the commissioners are able to go to the Connecticut Bar Association course every couple of years. It's held at Wesleyan. And that's a really good place to start. I think the Connecticut chapter has a lot of qualified people, and certainly John among them, who are familiar with legislation and what's going on at the legislature. And those kinds of components should be part of a course as well. I think it should be required that the commissioners do go to that. I know that some towns are concerned about the cost of that, but there are so many organizations around, whether it's APA or the Connecticut chapter of APA or the Bar Association or many of the environmental organizations that would be willing to put this course together. I don't think the cost is going to be an issue at all. But one thing I think that's important is that commissioners need to understand that they look at some of the parts of their community that are the most well-liked. Take a look at Washington Green, for example, or some of the other very aesthetically pleasing greens in some of these small towns. They couldn't be built with the zoning regulations that we have in place today. And so what that means to me as a planner is there's got to be room for change in the regulations. We can't just continue to build the same thing that the regulations say now and continue with sprawl. So there needs to be some indication that simply border-to-border sprawl in the regulations in a town are not really what people want to see. They want to see some innovation. They want to see some housing, especially on an equitable basis that can satisfy the needs of the community, both now, but in the future as well. And one of the last things that I think is really important for commissioners to understand is that if we're not planning for the kids in our community to go forward in the future, then I'm not sure what our communities are all about. If it's not about the kids and the community in the future, then I think we really need to take a hard look at what we're trying to do.
How would you guys look? There are a range of issues that I think could be further underscored in a lot of the towns. And they range from particular issues like parking requirements, where we know that people don't need or want as many cars as they need. And every time, we've all heard estimates of parking spaces adding $40,000 to $60,000 per to a development. We've heard of issues like maybe having zoning commissioners being appointed rather than elected, that's an issue. We've heard of issues like the length of time that the whole land use process takes and how that can dissuade developers. Do you think the commissioners need to understand better some of those particular issues? And I would underscore about developers and home builders that, time is money. And do you think commissioners all understand exactly what the problems are for a developer to put together a proposal and finance it? Again, we can start with Kara again on that one if you want.
Sure. So I think there needs to be a greater understanding. We love our public hearings here in Glastonbury, but we often laugh on the staff side how everything requires a special permit, and in a way. There's been some benefits to that in the sense that it gives the commission the ability to have some design influence and to get the design that they would like to see in the community. But it can lead to some unpredictability in the process in which you're meeting the zoning regulations, but maybe the commission, through the public hearing process, is using their discretion to ask for certain things beyond what the regulations may call for as far as design goes. So it could be a lengthy process too. In one way, we have a lot of pre-application steps here in Glastonbury, which helps with making the application successful as it goes through the final steps in the regulatory process. But on the other end, it can add, time. And of course, if you're adding time, you're adding costs to the project also. And we try to usher those applications through as quickly as possible. But I think some greater understanding would be helpful on the commission end to help to get those applications, through quicker.
Okay, John?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Kara that everything being a special permit can be a challenge. I get the parking concern and do think that at least in a lot of our towns, the parking regulations are too high and based on very little. But I will say, on the other hand, most of the communities I work in are not transit-oriented communities. We don't have a lot of Metro North stations in Hampton or in Willington. So they are still very auto dependent. And so the parking thing doesn't necessarily resonate as much with me. But I think as I said earlier, the special permit process is a problem. But I would even go one step beyond that, is that a lot of our regulations in those commercial centers, in those areas where you are close to jobs and close to community facilities, those areas tend to be commercially zoned primarily, and don't even anticipate mixed use or multifamily in a community core, in a downtown area or in a village center area. And so it's not even just a special permit hassle, but you're actually, developers who have an interesting and innovative, maybe mixed use idea, are facing the additional hurdle of having to change the regulations to allow something brand new. And changing the regulations beyond a special permit process is completely at the will of the Planning and Zoning Commission. They are under absolutely no requirement to accept even a good idea, because all they have to just say, no, we think the Plan of Conservation and Development doesn't support that. And so, developers with interesting and innovative ideas that aren't currently in the regulations really have to make that gamble. And they say, what is this? Is this a 30% shot of success in terms of approval? Is it a 10% shot? And kind of roll the dice there. And that's a tough way to encourage development.
Yeah. Hiram?
Yeah, I would say that the process needs to be smoothed out significantly. No question about that. I think everyone sort of would agree on that. The question really is how we do it. And I think that there are a couple of things that we could do in order to help that along. One is staff in each of the towns, if the town has a staff or a consultant such as John, or another planning consultant, needs to be really clear with the applicant as to what they think will work well in that particular town. So good, strong advice at the front end of the process is sometimes very, very helpful. Sometimes it's sort of a joke when people say, well, what did you do today? And you can't really say, well, I avoided 3 terrible ideas, or I kept 3 awful applications from coming to the commission. But in fact, that's what happens sometimes. So try to make the process smoother by getting good information up front is really, really critical. And I think that's very helpful. The other thing that I would stress, David, I think is that each of us as staff people or planners have to be concerned about what the design of the application or looks like as it comes into the town. Some of the buildings can have more units in them, but if the design is really excellent, people aren't going to say, well, how many units does that have? They're going to say, well, I really like that design. So we're really not so concerned with the numbers, but we really want to know what it looks like. So figuring out what the particular community's aesthetic is and trying to make it look like it looks like it belongs in the community, I think is really important as well. And then the last thing I would say to make the process smoother, is, and I'm maybe preaching to the choir here, but it seems like if we could at the local level get a bit more help from some of the state agencies sometimes, that would be a huge help. The state processes sometimes take a long time, and sometimes there's a good reason for that. Other times I think that things could move along a lot more quickly. DOT is a big, I wouldn't I'd say elephant in the room, but it's a big bureaucracy. There's no question about it. And sometimes things take a long time. So you talk about the cost of applications and you look at just a little tiny application in one small town in Connecticut, and the applicant's probably sitting there spending, $1,500 or $2,000 an hour in consultants sitting at these meetings. So the quicker we can move these things through the process and get an answer, whether it's yes or no, I think is better for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the title of the session is to deal with housing inequality. And what we know about a lot of our towns is that there is not a large enough range of housing choices at various income levels to allow people to move to the town if they want. So the zoning is exclusionary, the housing stock is exclusionary. What about, besides changing the process and the length of time, you are all experienced. What advice might you have for planners and others here about the ability to have a heart-to-heart with your zoning commissioners about do we really want to open this town? Do we want to provide more opportunity for people to live in this town and not be burdened by their housing costs? Have you had any kind of experience with that? Any good experience? Any hints you may have for towns, planners, and their residents?
Well, I think going through the planner conservation and development process is a good way to start to open up those conversations and to begin to talk about, housing should be a component of the planner conservation development with the goals and the policies that you want. And I think that could be a good place to start with commissioners to open that up and to also invite the public to come and speak on, any issue, including housing. And when we went through our plan of conservation and development process, we did get some input from the public in regards to housing and affordability and senior housing. So that could be a good way to facilitate that conversation. And then you could take it a step further, after the PLCD and then use that as a springboard to doing things such as affordable housing plans or to adjust the zoning regulations, rather it's to allow those accessory dwelling units or, what you want to have as a special permit process, or if there's a way to do things without the special permit process. So, I would say, starting with some discussion and visioning about the future and what the commission sees as the future for the community through the PLCD process can be a good way to start.
But John, this requirement that every town have an affordable housing plan by, I guess it's July 1 of 2022, and I know you're working with a lot of towns on those plans. Is that strictly just a bureaucratic effort to get some stuff down on paper, or are you trying to bring residents to the table, people in the town to understand housing better along with the commissioners? We need to deal with inequality here, and are you finding this is a good vehicle to do it?
Well, we'll see. And I think it'll vary from town to town. I think there's some towns that see this as just another state mandate that they have to check the box and get a plan in place, and are just going to write, something very simple. Because right now, unfortunately, there aren't really any criteria from the state about what needs to be in these plans. But some towns I think are going to use this, as Kara said, as a real opportunity to kind of have a productive discussion about what the town ought to look like. And so after railing against towns and processes for this first half hour of the session, I do want to be a little bit of an apologist for some towns, because I think a lot of towns do want to do the right thing, but it's not clear what the right thing is. And again, I'll use the example of Hampton, which is a tiny town in Windham County, 1,800 people, no sewer, no water, no traffic lights, no job center, no real housing market. What is that town really expected to do? I mean, they have, as of right, duplexes. I mean, you can have 2 units on any single family lot as of right. So it's, you know, your accessory dwelling units or your accessory apartments as of right. They could make, you know, multifamily as of right in town, and it wouldn't make a nickel's worth of difference because there's no jobs and there's no way to get from here to there, and there's no infrastructure. So I think the affordable housing plans is an opportunity to kind of do that self-examination and ground truthing to say, you know, what are we actually capable of doing given where we are in the world and in the market, and try to, and you know, in the cases of Hampton, you know, their 830G percentage is probably 3.5% or something like that. And, you know, and some of it is because it's a rural town with large lot zoning and it's hard to do affordable there. But, you know, in the best of circumstances, they're really never going to get to 10%. But, you know, can we find ways to, you know, pay down, you know, pay some people that have accessory apartments to do an 830G deed restriction? Can we give them a tax credit to make it worth their while and to increase our stock that way? I think it's about really understanding the towns and setting those expectations. I don't know if I answered your question, but that was something I wanted to say.
Well, Hiram, I mean, would you use the affordable housing plan process to gather people together in towns and discuss the housing needs of the town and the fact that we don't allow people into the town that we ought to, and let's widen our array of housing options? I know under the Sustainable Connecticut program, towns like Glastonbury, Kara can speak to this, had great sessions on equity and brought a number of people to town and talked about the town's housing needs and the things that could be done to make the town more inclusive. So what's your thought about the affordable housing plan as a vehicle?
Yeah, I think it's a great vehicle to be able to do that. I think, as John said, the state hasn't really put a lot of specific requirements or any specific requirements in the construction of these plans. So I think it's a great opportunity to explore, you know, each of these towns and to have a good, honest, open discussion about housing and about equity in these towns and all the towns that are going to have an affordable housing plan done in the near future. I think that's really critical. I think what's really helpful too, at least I find that one of the most enjoyable parts, as perverse as this may be, as public hearings, is when people stand up to complain about things. I really enjoy hearing what it is that they think is so awful about a particular project, because that gives you an opportunity to address those specific issues, whether it's the value, whether it's school children, whether it's traffic or density or design or erosion and sedimentation control, whatever it is, to find out what's really on their mind. So I think that the affordable housing plans, in this case specifically, can lead to an opening of a good, open, honest discussion with people about where the community is now, where it needs to go in the future, and hopefully provide a good basis for being included in the plan of development, plan of conservation and development, and moving forward in the future. So I think it's a great vehicle.
Kara, what about that? I know Glastonbury had a great session on equity, and is that the kind of thing that you can build off of? And I know other towns have had those sessions as well.
Absolutely. When we went through the certification process back in 2018, and we're going through that process again for recertification under Sustainable Connecticut, that vehicle is a great opportunity to start to open up conversations about equity and about housing. Both topics are required under the Sustainable Connecticut program. And you can also, use both of those topics together. So I think that going through that experience in 2018 was a great way to open up awareness as far as where you are in your community with these issues, and to bring people together and to bring people into the fold, so that there can be a greater awareness and greater involvement when going forward with issues on housing inequity.
You know, I know in the next week that Regional Plan Association is going to release its guidebook that the Department of Housing asked it to produce on how towns can create their affordable housing plans. And I know that one of the proposals is to have a town housing committee, and that they also will include in their examples around the state that we all know about of very, very successful affordable and mixed income developments, some at low affordability levels for people making 30, 50, 60% of AMI. And they are in towns like Avon and Fairfield and Farmington and New Canaan and Darien. To what degree do you think, and would you advise both your fellow planners and zoning commissions around the state to have a look at what's been built around the state and to understand that their worst fears and their residents' worst fears about graffiti on the walls and used syringes on the ground and whatever stereotypical pictures they might have in their minds just don't come to fruition? I mean, what about using examples to show people that, you know, Black and brown and white and Asian people can all live together and it's worked out fine already all over the state? What about examples?
I think I think that's a great way, and to open up awareness in the community, and you can do that through the vehicle of Sustainable Connecticut or through the Affordable Housing Plan. You know, it's great to show those examples, to dispel the myths and the fears. And you know, affordable housing comes in many different, you know, shapes and forms, and it provides a multi-level of quality of life benefits for a community. So examples are always great, you know, when you're trying to, and we do the same thing with other planning issues. I think it really helps to open up awareness for commissioners.
John?
Yeah, I think the visual element, to sort of echo what I had said at the beginning, is the visual example, seeing what it actually looks like is a huge difference maker. And to you know, reveal the name of the mystery town I teased at the beginning, this happened in Essex, where people were very much opposed to this 50-unit affordable housing complex, again, 830G, so 30% affordable. And the design turned out to be quite lovely, and it's almost universally appreciated now. And so much and so that we've had people say, where else in town could we do this? And it's you know, a good example of how, you know, a good developer with good design can make those concerns go away, or be, you know, really knocked down for future applications. So it's, you know, if people can see it, they can understand it.
And Hiram, I mean, the point is, it's not only that it looks good, as John said, and it's designed well, but I think you can point to the fact, I know in Avon and Simsbury, you've had developments where, again, their worst fears that the police are going to be there every night or whatever it is, just don't come true. Do you use that? Would you recommend it?
Yeah, I think those are great examples, David. You know, one that in a town that I worked in New Canaan for a number of years a while ago. And when I first came to the town, the first selectman said to me, they had this terrible affordable housing development that built right on the parking lot of the train station, right next to the train station. And of course, that's a great location for a transit-oriented development. There's no question about that. But he said he didn't want it there. He wanted that preserved for parking so that people from surrounding towns, even New York State, and could come and park there. But what happened was we actually found another location for that development, and the development was built. It's really quite attractive. It's still walking distance to the train station, and it's right near the transit and very near the center of New Canaan. So I think that is an example of a very design-conscious, high-value town can be used as an example where that can be done. And there are other examples out in northwestern Connecticut where the density is significantly lower but they've done a great job with some examples in a more rural setting out there as well. So I think those examples are great, and they dispelled a lot of the fears I think that people might have, depending upon whether the situation is very rural or a bit more urban. So I think those are great ideas.
So before we get to final thoughts, I'm just wondering, John or Kylie or Kaylee, whether you see questions that people have asked that we want to help respond to. Anything there?
Sure. There's a whole list. There's 8 questions in the chat. I don't know if you guys want me to go through those. We have 5 minutes left. There's a bunch of comments as well. Just looking through to determine whether there's anything specific. We touched on this a little bit, but someone talked specifically about racism and the fact that race plays a huge issue in, a lot of what we're talking about here and a lot of the opposition that we're seeing. I don't know if any of you wanted to speak more in depth about that and any strategies, conversations, or other examples you have that might be illustrative on that concept.
What about it, you guys? Have you dealt with it straight on and just talked about race, or have you heard it from people? What's the best way for your colleagues in their towns to deal with the race issue now?
I'll start that one, David. In a town, not where I currently work, but in a town not far away from here, there was a development that was being proposed, very high end, very nice condominium development. And somebody came in one day and said, I really don't want those people walking by my residence on the way to school. And I couldn't believe my ears, actually. And so I sort of confronted them. I said, I really don't understand what you're talking about. Explain to me what the problem is. And they were sort of so embarrassed that I actually confronted them head on. They finally went away, and I never had to deal with them through the rest of the process. Now, I'm not sure that that's going to work for everybody, but I think confronting the issue head on to the best of our abilities is one way to do it. It worked for me, at least in that situation.
Deal with it head on. I mean, that's why I talk about examples. I mean, I think if you can show people that this has been done all over and it's worked out fine and the developments look as good today as they did when they were first built and there have been no problems, that can, kind of win the day. Any final thoughts, Kara or John? Because it looks like we're getting close to time here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the problem in most of the communities I work with is that, things have been so exclusionary over so many decades that there really aren't that many non-white people to speak to or to point to as these folks are being discriminated against. So I would sort of go back to sort of the long history of zoning and work through that way. And then also focus on the economic inequality as much as race, because I think that is something that people can get their arms around more easily and address more easily. Because when you're being, more economically equitable, the hope is that racial and ethnicity equity will follow. But it's not easy.
One final thought. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no! I just to echo what Hiram and John said. Yes, I think confronting those issues head on is important, and also just to emphasize again, equity. Equity becomes a great way to start those conversations also. And you can use tools such as if you're looking for ways to get it started, if you're trying to get your arms wrapped around that, you can look for tools such as Sustainable Connecticut to help get those pieces started. Some communities have also started in other ways with having committees on equity, race, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. That could be another way too.
Yeah, I think those people are the ones who can come to the public hearings and at least get up politely after somebody says something silly and say, well, that's not exactly true. And I know towns like Old Saybrook and Stonington and Fairfield and Guilford have created committees like that that can stand up and speak for the development as opposed to those who speak against it. Kylie, I don't know, are we near the end here? Do we have to end?
We are at time. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you so much to our presenters. We've had lots of ongoing conversations about zoning. There's going to be a lot more. So there's another one coming right up at 3:30 around ADUs and conversions. So I put the link to that in the chat. You also saw the poll pop up. So I just ask if you could take a minute to complete that. That would be great. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks again to our panelists for participating. I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Happy Thanksgiving.